This afternoon, we will hear plenty about that, about how it can definitely be mightier than the sword. But I'd love to start by introducing Khalid Ahmed. You all know that he's one of the best known political journalists and commentators in the country. He is notable for his depth of historical and political understanding. He has been a former consulting editor of the Daily Times, resident editor of the Frontier Post, joint editor of The Nation, and assistant editor of the Pakistan Times. He is currently director, South Asian Free Media Association, Lahore. He contributes regular articles to the Friday Times and Express Tribune. Over the years, Khalid Ahmed has lectured at the Civil Service Academy, Lahore, and the Administrative Staff College, Lahore. He has delivered lectures at the Naval War College, Lahore. He was a scholar at Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C., and has delivered lectures at many, many different institutions in USA and elsewhere. And now I will hand over the mic to Khalid Ahmed to do the honors. Thank you so much.
I wonder if Ahmed is going to agree to the title, which is Pen as Sword. I thought that was a purely an Urdu idiom because that's dedicated to war as expression. But I think if you convert it into English, it has to be sword converted to pen, maybe sword as pen. Ahmed is going to talk about the creation of new narrative in fiction today. When you talk about fiction today, you will encounter a lot of people young people, talented people who write in English. The field of Urdu fiction has been affected greatly by what's going on in Pakistan. As you must have noticed that there is a division between English and Urdu in the country. What you can write in English, you can't write in Urdu. And that has affected the entire business of writing, and that includes fiction too. What has happened to Urdu over the years can be traced. But what Ahmed probably is going to refer to is the early creativity in the Urdu language and what is happening now in the Pakistani English language writers. And I think he'll try and look at the creation of a new, true narrative in English language writers. Why is he saying this? Is that he's tackled with the emergence of new narrative by the state of Pakistan, which he thinks has to be changed if we have to survive as a nation. And he's putting a lot of store by these new writers who are taking advantage of the international globalized literary market, in which a lot of people outside Pakistan want to know what a Pakistani feels like. And some of the new crop of writers are writing about Pakistan and its violence and are trying to make sense of it. Some of them are trying to negotiate Pakistan with the external world, trying to explain to them why Pakistanis are the way they are. And some of them are good intermediaries in that, because the world view of Pakistan is very negative and at times quite prejudiced. And you will find our writers like Mohsin Hamid who want to play a median role. They want to tell the world what Pakistan is like really and the dilemmas that Pakistanis face themselves. People have written about the violence in Karachi. I think that is something that Urdu has not been able to do, and there are understandable reasons why this is not happening. As we go along, Ahmed and I will keep on bouncing questions off each other. I think the discussion will be very useful because Ahmed is going to touch upon all these writers who are writing in English one by one and try and tell us what they're doing. And in this process, I think he'll have to answer a lot of questions. Let's see how he fields them. Towards the end, after I have commented on what he says, and he'll probably have to answer a few questions, it will be open to the House to ask him some more. With these words, I request Ahmed Rashid to say his piece about a pen as sword or sword as pen, whatever you like.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, OUP, Amina, and the British Council for inviting me for the second year running. And it's a great pleasure to have such a wonderful and large audience, which includes a large number of my family, as it did last year. I've taken the unusual step. Normally, I lecture a lot. I don't normally write out my lectures. I speak it, or as friends would say, you wing it. I've taken the trouble of writing this out because I thought it was very important. Let me just start by saying my latest book, Pakistan on the Brink, will be out next month, and I hope some of you will read it. I have tried in all my books and lectures to young people to promote the need for a new narrative for Pakistan in order to understand our problems better and start to overcome them. I've found a very good response in young people, especially in the last few years, who want to know the truth about why we are in such a mess. In other words, they no longer buy the narratives put out by the military, the politicians, or the mullahs. But non-fiction is nowhere as influential as fiction, just as cinema is often a more powerful medium than television. And we are lucky because after a gap of many decades, we are producing world-class novelists and writers in English who have contributed much to this new narrative and need to do even more. I'm going to dwell now for a little bit on the crisis that we face, and I see it basically as externally driven. The crisis we face today is a result of a faulty, perverse, and dishonest narrative that is fed to us by the military, the intelligence agencies, the political elite, religious scholars, and our own history books. We produce nuclear weapons, but not a modern educational system. Nor does the elite believe in promoting literacy. We spend 30 to 35% of our budget on the military, and not even a hundredth of that on health. The military has turned Pakistan into a national security state that forever has to maintain vigilance against our neighbors. We are told that everything bad that happens is because of outside forces. Agents of the US or India or Israel or those who want to destroy Pakistan or seize its nuclear weapons and other such myths. It is we who have been, but what I have been positing in my books, it is that it is we who have been expansive and aggressive in our foreign policy towards our neighbors and provoked wars and insurgencies. Yet we demand that the world see us as the permanent victims, as the bicharas. We never look inwards to ourselves, to answers to our problems. We are obsessed with blaming others. Our inability to get real is heavily related to our failure to wake up to the benefits that could have come our way after the end of the Cold War. Until 1989, our geographical and strategic potential was hidebound by the Cold War. We were an American ally, and we were at odds with all our neighbors who were pro-Soviet, except for Iran. But when the Cold War ends, the Berlin Wall comes down in 1989, we refuse to see the new reality and potential. We are at the crossroads of Asia, and we have a map there, and could promote trade and regional cohesion. The whole region potentially opens up to us. Pipelines, energy, transport. We are the hub. We are the geopolitical land bridge for trade between Central Asia and the Middle East, between Iran and Afghanistan, and between Iran, West Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. We had the possibilities to lay down roads and railways, gas and oil pipelines that would bring resources from Central Asia, but we failed. We denied ourselves this opportunity. Instead, we promoted an expansionist foreign policy that sustained wars on both our borders. In 1989, we finished with one war in Afghanistan and started another in Kashmir. We legitimized the extremists who came out of the Afghan and Kashmir wars. We made them the heroes of the state and eulogized their achievement in killing Indians, Kashmiris and Afghans in our literature, in our poetry and in our newspapers. We turn them into political players at home. The power, I'm thinking particularly of organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and others. We acquire nuclear weapons, and instead of negotiating how to make them acceptable to the world, given the widespread nuclear proliferation carried out by A.Q. Khan and his allies, General Musharraf takes us to war in Kargil in 1989, under cover of the nukes. In other words, we become the first nuclear power to carry out nuclear blackmail to the rest of the world. In Afghanistan, in 2001, we pursue a double game, going after Al-Qaeda, as the US asked us to do, but allowing the Taliban to regroup in Pakistan and relaunch their offensive in 2003. Bush does not notice the Taliban as we put all our muscle into the Taliban revival. Meanwhile, the Pakistani Taliban grow and expand out of FATA and into Swat and other areas as a result of the influence, money and indoctrination carried out by Al-Qaeda and Afghan Taliban. We revive the Zia's themes of strategic depth and strategic defiance for anyone who criticizes us, and to justify our interference in Afghanistan. Elected governments are thrown out for being anti-patriotic and anti-national, for harming the national interest. But who defines this national interest? Is it the civilians? Because if the civilians did so, the national interest would demand economic development and education and other such things. So as a result of the national interest being defined almost entirely by the military, today we find ourselves isolated from the international community and from most of our neighboring countries. Our foreign policy, starting with the recent estrangement with the United States, which is now spreading to Europe, is a disaster. No foreign country wants to deal with Pakistan on a rational basis. Unfortunately, the political elite succumbs to this. It hands over foreign policy and national security to the military so that the elite can be left alone to promote corrupt practices, incompetence, a failure to carry out economic reforms, or govern wisely. No government sees itself as responsible to the people or the nation. Those who rule have no sense of service to the people. So the crisis today is the result of all these broad factors. And our new writers are reflecting this. Let me just remind you that we had a flourishing Muslim writers movement in the 1940s and 50s, mostly left-wing, but it was the intellectual core of Pakistan when Pakistan was founded in 1947. These writers had a vision for Pakistan, which unfortunately many of our writers and journalists today lack. Lahore was considered the intellectual center of the subcontinent. It was called the Paris of the East. We all remember Hemingway and Picasso in the 1930s Paris. But none of our children, our young people today can recall the names of writers, artists, and intellectuals of early Pakistan. People like Saadat Hasan Manto, Taseer, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, A.S. Bukhari, Colonel Majid Malik, Hafiz Jalandhari, Abdul Rahman Chughtai, and many, many more. Today's writers come from this tradition of intellectual involvement in the state of the national Today's writers come from this tradition of intellectual involvement in the state of the nation and political activism. Even though, as Khalid rightly pointed out, they are writing in English, they're not writing in Urdu. But it's a very moot question as to what has happened to the Urdu novel. It's almost disappeared. The serious Urdu novel as something that gives you a sense of society and nation and vision is no longer there, which it certainly was during Manto's time, as Aisha Jalal so aptly described it. Raising social consciousness, making readers aware of their social responsibilities to fellow citizens. Today's writers help us create a civic culture, which is so lacking. They feel the same despair we all feel about the future of this country, but they look at what has gone wrong and what can be put right. They do not look for Jews or Indians or Americans to blame. They look inwards into themselves and their society to come up with answers. In that, they are true Pakistanis. I consider a true Pakistani as somebody who first is able to look at himself and his own society before criticizing others. And that is not the concept of the true Pakistani according to a lot of the media that we are faced with. I'm thinking in particular of the marvelous satire that Muhammad Hanif gives us in A Case of Exploding Mangoes. Single-handedly, he has reintroduced satire into this country, where satire had disappeared since Manto and the 1950s, when satire ceased being a part of our literary tradition. Hanif gives us a devastating critique of military rule and the Zia-ul-Haq era. I'm thinking of Mohsin Hamid and Moth Smoke, where he writes about the underbelly of Lahore well before we recognized that Lahore even had an underbelly. In The Reluctant Fundamentalist, he alerts us in advance to the great moral dilemmas of our time: extremism, intolerance, suicide bombing. A great writer has to be ahead of his time, to warn his compatriots of the dangers ahead, and Mohsin Hamid certainly is. I'm thinking of Daniel Mohyuddin and his In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, about the decadence of the landowning class and the simple but unfulfilled needs of ordinary rural peasants. He describes a part of our sociology and culture that we have to change. But he writes about values that we have to preserve if we are to survive as a nation. I'm thinking of Kamila Shamsi, who in her Burnt Shadows has put away her youthful angst and writes now almost a Tolstoyan work that describes global events in the context of multiple generations of Pakistanis, how some have tried to build this nation and others have ended up becoming suicide bombers and tried to destroy it. And new voices like M.B. Naqvi, whose Homeboy reflects the language and attitudes of the new Pakistani diaspora scattered around the world, that is global and yet local, and from whom we could learn much about tolerance and building a civil society. And many others, and I mention here particularly Amina Sayyed and Muniza Shamsi, who promote fiction and young writers and have not let the genre die in this bitter and often bloody landscape that we live in today. So I would like to see even more social activism on the part of our writers in English, providing their readers with a new narrative as how to see Pakistan. Their writing must guide us and help us understand our problems and the crisis we are in. They must also help us find solutions to these problems so our children can live better lives than we have. Thank you very much.
A few words about what's happened to Urdu over this earlier, that if you are writing in Urdu, you can't write certain things. If you send your article to the Urdu newspaper, it will not be taken. If you're critical of what the state is doing, if you're critical of ideology, which is in the process of becoming totalitarian, and which is responding to the stimulus of Al-Qaeda and Taliban, and a population which lives under intimidation. I would go so far as to say that Urdu itself lives under intimidation, and it has lived in the former years before the advent of Al-Qaeda and Taliban as an anti-cultural attitude of the state. A Muslim state will never reconcile to culture because most of it is entertainment. So when the Taliban came to Swat and they attacked the music shops, they didn't find any Pakistani culture in them. They just find Indian movie songs. And this is true of all the small cities of Pakistan. If you go to a music shop, you'll find Indian entertainment. India is actually rescuing us from the tightening noose of ideology in Pakistan and the intimidation which is radiating from the ungoverned spaces of Pakistan where Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, Punjabi Taliban and the Uzbeks live. The literary magazines are gone in Urdu. People don't write columns in Urdu which are revealing or which tell the truth. Amazingly, for the last 25 years, Intezar Hussain is being revived again and again. In Urdu, since what he writes is excellent stuff, and because Urdu there is shown in its full creative sense, that Intezar Hussain is being relied upon to fill the gap of the new writers which should have come in. I personally believe, and I want Ahmed Rashid to talk about it a little bit, is that I expected the new great Urdu novel to come out of the Christian community, which has suffered most. And that book, that novel, should have been the greatest novel ever. I should have also because the Christian community lives under blasphemy law, the suffering that they go through, and behind blasphemy law is also the Muslim instinct of converting people forcibly. And if you are coercive, if you are intimidatory in your attitude, conversions actually take place. And you'll find at random news in Pakistan, so many Christians have converted to Islam. The next big novel should have come out of the Hindu community, which is suffering in Sindh, especially in Tharparkar, because they're found in large numbers there. Again, the same kind of a passion for conversion with an undertone of sexual assault. Urdu has also suffered. I think that this is the next point that I want to make, because we are talking about the English language fiction in Pakistan. We must also look at what has happened to us in Urdu. And you will find that about 20 years of travel writing has had a very exhausting effect on Urdu. Travel writing, we call it Safarnama, was 20 years of civilizational clash, again underlined by male sexual assault. It is a strange way of looking at the West while you're traveling there, but it happened. People made great criticism of it, were ignored. Muhammad Khalid Akhtar actually is the person who took real account of these travelogues, which told us nothing about what was really going on in the West, about their institutions and their values, but talked about a lot about how a Muslim feels. And this kind of thing you will find going back into the centuries, where the Muslim visits the West and is completely disenchanted and talks about the superiority of his own civilization. This kind of emasculation of the Urdu idiom has been overlaid by the threat from the terrorist, that he will not allow you to bring in the new narrative. The narrative does exist, but this narrative is denied because it is supposed to be inculcated from the outside. People like me, Ahmed Rashid, who are actually talking the language of the foreigners. But last time we tried to translate a book of Ahmed Rashid. I think it was your last book, Descent into Chaos. And the translation, the title was America Ki Bad Ahdi. It was actually a critique. I'm not saying anything untrue. I think Ahmed Rashid subjects America to a lot of criticism in that book. But he's also exposing us. That's why he's a persona non grata. It's like Dalrymple telling us how the imperials came again and again to Afghanistan and were defeated and were punished, and we all clapped. But when he was talking about our own habits of boiling our opponents in cauldrons, or what we did to the British as they were retreating, we just didn't register. It is that kind of deadness of the mind that we have in us. We are simply not focusing on what the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are doing. For instance, the son of Salman Taseer has been abducted by Punjabi Taliban, taken to North Waziristan, and the Punjabi Taliban and the Uzbeks who lack for funds are keeping him. And the person who's living right next is Haqqani's camp. Haqqani is there, and when a request was made to Haqqani to get the boy released, Haqqani said, I can't do it. In fact, the story is that they all want money, and they want a lot of money for the return of that boy. And the state can't do anything. And the state is going to Qatar on the strength of their control, so-called control over Haqqani. That's the kind of narrative which is developing, and we don't know it because nobody talks about it. If you talk about it in English even, you are under threat, and that threat has come to us again and again. What I want to emphasize is that as it goes on, the state from ideological to totalitarian, and the daily success of Al-Qaeda and Taliban in the ungoverned spaces and the marauding activities they have in the big cities, more and more the chances of Urdu fiction dying is there. I can't believe that Urdu will write a Fasana-e-Azad kind of satire on the death of Osama bin Laden. It is a comic story to tell how the Pakistanis have reacted to the death of Osama bin Laden. Next thing is the Memogate. Who is going to write the great satirical Urdu story about people who are charged with treason for trying to remove the tyranny of the army from this country? Normally, it's the army which commits treason against the state. Here is an elected government being charged with treason for trying to resist the military oppression in Pakistan. These are some of the themes that have to come through Urdu, and the Urdu has to be something like Fasana-e-Azad, which was written in the pre-independence days and it was very satirical of the local response to British Raj. It was supposed to be a pro-British Raj large collection of comic sketches. I must say that, like Marquez, when you see that a civilization is going down and there is no bottom, then you write a comic novel, a semi-comic novel which sounds like tragedy. That's what Marquez does with Hispanic civilization, all the dictatorships and the decadence that you see. Two authors have done this to Ziaul Haq. One, Salman Rushdie, and somebody said that his book was superior, but Muhammad Hanif has done it too. I think Pakistan is ripe for comic novels. You can't make sense of Pakistan except through satire and through comic writing. And I think that Urdu should have done it, but Urdu is too scared to actually do it. For this, I want you to ask questions of Ahmed Rashid, who's talked to you earlier. Yes. Yes, sir.
To both of you here, I agree that Urdu has failed as far as the novel is concerned. But there's quite a bit of poetry and also some short stories have been written, taking view of this situation. And at the same time, I agree that, that when you write the things in Urdu, for instance, the columns which are printed in English, which I write, sometimes the Urdu newspapers turn them back that it's too dangerous to print. So it's that narrative which you just mentioned. But my question basically is, the Pashtun society has suffered a lot during all this. And the Baloch society is also suffering a lot. Both of you, because I have not been able to find something, did you find any good literature which is showing what is happening to the Pashtun society for the last 30 years or to a Baloch society?
First, let me just make a general comment. Urdu cannot survive on the back of poetry. We have not only hardly any Urdu modern novels today, we have no Urdu non-fiction. Nobody writes in Urdu the kind of books that I write, for example, describing what has been going on politically, geopolitically, etc., etc. There is no critique at all in non-fiction. So, and I don't think Urdu can just, then Urdu becomes a drawing room language, which was, of course, where it originated from in the Mughal camp. Around the campfire, you recited these poems and the Urdu language evolved, etc., etc., with all the influences of Persian and Arabic and Turkic and, etc. So, if Urdu is going to be a thriving language, and this, of course, is linked to our educational system. If you're not going to educate your public, obviously, you're not going to produce literature or writing or reading. As Amina said today in the opening, people don't have books to read. Forget English, people don't have books to read in Urdu either. I remember very well in 2001, the first thing I did in Afghanistan after the war ended, I set up this NGO which tried to provide reading material to schools. There was there was this huge literary drive. They put 5 million kids into school with the Americans and the UN and UNESCO. They had nothing to read at all. They didn't even have textbooks. And, you suddenly woke up and you said, but look, I suddenly, it hit me that this is the state of Pakistan also. I mean, out of the tens of thousands of schools, how many actually have libraries? A minuscule number. So, this is where again Urdu has failed. And I think the media, unfortunately, what we see is we do not see progressive Muslims, Pakistanis, writing in the Urdu media. The Urdu media is totally, particularly the print media, and increasingly the television media and the talk shows, are dominated by reactionary, uneducated talk show hosts or writers who have no idea of the political history of this country, who have no sympathy for the minorities or the non-Sunni majority in this country. They have no political sense of the geopolitics of the region and how we are affected by that. And naturally, the Urdu language and literature is going to suffer because of that.
Just a few words. Urdu has really taken over the Baloch and the Pashtun society in Pakistan. If the Baloch want to write, the written idiom available to them is Urdu, because their own languages are such verbal languages. But in Afghanistan, a person who wrote the novel Kite Flyer, I think, or something like that, and then he made a film and he had to run away from Afghanistan. He now lives in the United States. I think if you write the true narrative, you have to run away. You can't stay here. The Pashtun are undergoing a strange kind of revival. That revival could be actually the sort of revival that Sufi Muhammad wants, or a very indecisive Pakistani thrust into that area in which we do not challenge the narrative that is coming out of Al-Qaeda and Taliban. We have a madrasa network which is totally dominated by the writings of Al-Zawahiri, who has written a draft constitution for Pakistan when he comes to power. And I think it is going to be very difficult for a Baloch who is completely oppressed to write anything in a language that he has forgotten. Similarly, the Pashtun in Pakistan can only speak his language. He doesn't write it. Yes, Sindhis have a very strong written idiom. We will wait for the Sindhi narrative if it comes out.
Yes, that's great. Mr. Ahmed, you keep saying no one's saying anything, no one's saying anything. Everyone's saying a lot. And they're going hoarse about what the politicians are doing. You say the military, yes, but the military is the military because the politicians are the politicians. Their corruption, their malfeasance, their misgovernance is creating what the monster that the military has become. And you are saying it, the court is saying it, the politicians, the government, nobody's listening. So you must find solutions. How do we get things across?
I have said that. I mean, I have said that the politicians have handed over, unfortunately, foreign policy responsibility to the military, and they are not responsible. They're not serving the people. They don't feel responsible for the nation, for the state, and they're far more involved in corrupt practices, etc., than actually governing. I said that in my talk. And we can't just blame the military. I certainly don't do that now, here, or in my books. It's a combined effort. But it is this whole ruling strata that has utterly failed the nation, basically. Utterly failed ordinary people. And which is why ordinary people are voting with their feet and basically trying to leave the country. Now, I still believe there's an enormous amount, that can be done. I think we need good leadership. And we need enlightened military leaders. We don't need the kind of military leaders who are coming out of the military colleges these days, unfortunately, where they come with a very, very narrowly focused mind. They're fed an ideology, and their minds are not opened up at all. But that is also the fate of our educational system today. Does our educational system in the civilian sector, do our universities actually provide the opening of the mind or the closing of the mind? And I would say to you, although I think a lot of young people today, I mean, the lady is absolutely right. Everybody's talking about it. Nobody's being able to come up, with a solution. But what I'm just trying to say about these novelists, if I can go back to that, these novelists writing in English, you cannot have great literature without an active, vibrant civil society. And this is where we have suffered most of all. In all these years, our civil society is still minuscule. I wouldn't say it's non-existent, but it's minuscule. And we don't tend to get involved with civil society activities, of which writing is a very important part. And writers surely, but I think, there are areas where we're excelling. Look at art and painting. I mean, you go to the art schools in Lahore and Karachi, and you look at the artists and the exhibitions that are being held, they're of a worldwide status now. The novelists in English who are writing are of a worldwide status now. So it's not, our economists who are sitting outside the country in institutions like the World Bank are world-class economists. So, this is a great assets that we have, which we are not really exploiting. And, in order to help build civil society and provide an answer to these rapacious politicians and generals and mullahs and, all these guys who are trying to mislead us and mislead the nation.
Can I just give a little bit different point of view? Is politicians really the first factor? Is he responsible for the domination of the army? I think there are two factors which come before the politician which allow the army to dominate. One is the idea of the state itself as the Muslims conceive it, and that applies to the entire Muslim world. And the kind of nationalism we have developed sitting next to India is a revisionist, a weak state nationalism which will always force the army to be trigger happy and to be intolerant of criticism. I don't think that a politician in Pakistan can ever succeed in overcoming the army's preeminence in Pakistan. As long as your nationalism is intact, which can only be put down through free trade and the disappearance of borders and a regional arrangement of a market. I don't think you can go on blaming the politician. I think he's deprived of his right to rule, and therefore he indulges in corruption. And I don't think that there will be a time very soon when he'll come into his own and do his job. I don't think that an ideological state will allow the politician to function. An ideological state, if it's a Muslim state, will always aspire to totalitarianism, something like what the Iranians have become. I don't think that you can blame the politicians sitting in the state of Pakistan.
Hi. It's really interesting because whenever one comes to these talks, it always kind of veers towards politics and military and politicians. But to kind of bring this back to what this session is about, whenever we talk about literature or whatever's left in Pakistan, it's always about the shrinking aspect of it. So do you think in a literature festival, it's time to start calling Ministry of Education here to talk about libraries that are missing, that schools that don't have books, or Urdu fiction, which is again lacking? Do you think we've come to that point?
The education as a subject is a provincial subject, and I think it's taken a lot of beating in Sindh compared to Punjab. It has actually evaporated, and most of the universities are now up in arms. One doesn't know why the teachers don't teach, and why are the teachers totally unqualified, and why do they want to be made permanent if they are totally unqualified? In Punjab, there are lots of places where there are no teachers. They're called ghost schools. But in Sindh, I hear the case is much worse. Who will you call to a talk like this? How will anybody who's involved in education come here and listen to what we are saying? They will not even understand the narrative that we are trying to revive against the state itself. And education is completely subjugated to the state. Education in Pakistan is the great brainwash of the narrative of the state. They will simply sit in a corner and squirm and probably leave before time.
No, it's a hallmark of a nation that it invests in its youth and in education. And it is totally the opposite in Pakistan. The ruling elite finds no need to invest in its youth and in their education. This is the tragedy. Now, I think there's a huge, where I think things are very positive is that there's a huge civil society movement for trying to do education, private education, charitable education, etc. But this civil society movement is still not able to equalize itself with the madrasa and the kind of distorted teachings that are going on in madrasas. The state has taken no action against that. The state is terrified of the madrasas. Musharraf, if you remember, promised to shut down all these extremist madrasas. We know the extremist madrasas have spread virulently right across the country in the last 11 years. They haven't been contained in any way whatsoever. So, if education itself is a battleground between civil society, private sector, modern education, etc., and on the other side you've got, extremism, who want to produce suicide bombers out of schools and turn children into suicide bombers, then what do you do? I mean, the state surely has to intervene, but the state doesn't intervene because it doesn't think education is important enough to intervene. It will intervene in Swat and it'll go into Fata and other places and it'll intervene in Balochistan, but it won't intervene in education. And we cannot make progress unless this changes.
Can I say, this is one sentence. Should we want the state to intervene? Should we get the education ministry to come in and say something? I think it is dangerous because now more and more politicians headed by Imran Khan says that Pakistan has 3 streams of education and we will make it into one. And I know which stream he will destroy. He will destroy the private sector English language stream and make it equal with the state-owned, the state-run schools. He will not be able to do anything. He will, just a minute. It is going to be, I know how the politician thinks. I don't think he's going to pull up the state-owned schools to the level of the private sector. So he will make it plain and make it equal. For instance, when they sent the new course to Gilgit, they didn't even think that the Gilgit population was Shia in majority. And there was a riot on the textbook. And the textbooks will have to be rewritten. I don't think the state can write those textbooks. The state is completely incapable of writing the kind of textbooks we want if we want this country to stay alive.
Very progressive, very secular literature is being written by a lot of youngsters, women, girls, but the issue is the mainstreaming of this literature. So I think there is a disconnect. People sitting in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, I don't know how they are going to develop this inclusiveness to get those people onto board. Recently, a young Hindu guy, he has written a novel on movement of restoration of democracy on MRD. In Sindhi, this novel is as equal as Muhammad Hanif says. So the issue is not, people are not writing. People are writing amazing literature in Pakistan. Go to the remote areas, go to the villages. On the assassination of Salman Taseer, 200 articles were written in Sindhi press against the blasphemy law. So a lot of is being written in this country, but issues again like we have security establishment, we have establishment of politicians, so we have another establishment of elite of literature clubs and writers. So I think they have to see to the down that people are really writing a lot and this country is contributing a lot.
Just hear this lady in the front and make that the last question and then we'll then the mic.
Thank you. We are here at a festival of literature in Pakistan, which is mostly in English. I think the literary group has to include as much as possible the Urdu, Sindhi, Balochi, Pashtun-speaking people, and I think there should be translators sitting to translate for them if they do not understand English, so that they can understand the level that you're at. I think what has happened in Pakistan, sadly, is the elitism of English. The brilliance of all the writers is great, but all the rest of our population is excluded. And if we want to bring our people up, if we want Urdu writing, if we want Sindhi writing, and bring that to the level of all the writers that are here, I think all the people who are on the dais have to start a movement for that. Thank you very much.
Add a few words to this. I totally agree with what you have said. We have seen over this, 40, 50 years, the death of the literary journal. Lahore was the center starting from here to whole of India, and all the Memons of Bombay used to buy those journals, up to Rangoon. Everybody bought those literary magazines. In Lahore, if you go to my library, personal library, you'll find the whole stack of them, from Adb Latif to Nakush. All of them are dead. There must be some reason. The market has given them up. And should NGOs or somebody revive them, or what is the solution? The big writers have shifted over to English, and there's a market. There's an international market for them, but there's no market for a Baloch writing excellent fiction or a Sindhi writing excellent fiction. There should be a vehicle for them, and that vehicle is not there.
Madam, the best-selling English book in Pakistan sells 5,000 copies. 5,000 copies. I mean, in a population of 180 million. The same book in India, can sell up to 1 million copies. Now, it's a whole, and now it's not a question, yes, of course, the Indian population is much bigger. It's a question of education. And it's a question of inculcating, as people said this morning, the idea and the tradition of reading and of being, literature being a part of your life and you being a part of literature. And we don't have that, unfortunately. It's just the opposite. If the madrasas are teaching you, are distorting the Quran and the Hadith and teaching you that the Quran says that you should commit suicide to kill Americans in Afghanistan, then and the state does not intervene. Nobody stops them. Then, what kind of society or what kind of youth are you producing?
And the best-selling Urdu novel, and Mustansir Santarar just written one, it doesn't sell even 500. 500 copies is the best you can do in Urdu. It's amazing. And it's a sad commentary.
I just got a comment. My name is Imran Baloch. I'm surprised to hear that, esteemed speakers mentioning that Baloch is just oral. Nothing in literary circle, nothing is being written. Let me share. Munir Badini, he's written 20 fiction books. You can go and see. Abdul Hakim Baloch, prolific writer. Surat Khan Mari is writing on politics. Gulkhan Nasir's poetry in Baluchi. You name it. The problem is our esteemed speakers, they are not aware of Balochistan, people, literary activities. How can we expect from people, ordinary people, to know about Balochistan? There's complete disconnect. We don't know each other. We don't know each other's psyche, their history. We do not actually, there was a show on BBC. People did not know the names of the cities except Quetta. This is the level of understanding. Even if you look at Karachi, there's a library in Malir which has thousands of books, mainly in Baluchi, and Baluch guys go and read. Liari Resource Center has a good library, has a lot of Baluchi books, The problem is complete disconnect, and we have to get out of this mindset that Urdu literary thing. We have to look beyond the true Pakistan, which has many, many colors and many languages and ethnic groups. That's the comment.
I have yet to see a lot of Baluchi language newspapers. Just as for instance, if you cross over to Afghanistan, there are 5 or 6 daily Pashto language newspapers. But in Peshawar, there was one publication, a seized publication. In Lahore, there was one Punjabi newspaper, and it's gone. But Punjabi is being written, there's no doubt about it. The only thing is that people don't get to read it, because you need a vehicle, you need a daily newspaper, you need magazines. That is what is lacking. And I think if the Baloch revival goes on, those will appear. But so far, the writ of the federal government and the ideology of the federal government is so overpowering that these idioms are being suppressed.
You've talked about the failure of the elite. And I think all the bashing that we do against the military and the politicians and the mullahs, what about the failure of civil society in Pakistan? This is also a very exclusive function that caters, I think, to a very few people. It will not be reported in the Urdu press as it is going to be reported in the English press. I think one of the biggest failure we've seen in Pakistan is the failure of the elite as a civil society group for change. All our writers, all our activists, everyone. We've done nothing, to promote and to provoke dynamism in Pakistan. We are not really in the clutches of the mullah or the military. We are in the clutches of our own meanness. And the meanness of the human soul, I think, overrides everything in Pakistan. I'm sorry I have made this adverse comment.
I agree with you completely. I mean, but I spoke about this, that civil society has failed to develop here. And, and it has failed to be the sort of, the third branch, after, of society in order to modernize and lead people. Civil society, in some areas, for example, education, it has developed extraordinarily well, but it cannot equate, obviously, with state education or with the madrasa network. But in some fields, it has developed. The question is that we have no real civil society movement in this country. That is the problem, which should have come out into the streets when Salman Taseer was murdered, which should have come out into the streets when Christians or Hindus are slaughtered, or Shias are massacred in Quetta, or whatever. That civil society, unfortunately, does not exist.
We couldn't inspire more than 100 people.
Yeah.
Any of these.
Can I challenge this? Because I think an ideological state is less able to nurture civil society. In fact, the emergence of civil society in Europe and in Renaissance, for instance, was among the guilds, who disconnected themselves from the non-centralizing state, because the central state had gone, and there were city-states. And within those city-states, there were these guilds, were traders basically, who became independent of the power of the state, and they were the countervailing force. In Pakistan as an ideological state, there's a tendency to actually eliminate civil society as an independent countervailing force to the power of the state. I think as time passes, as Taliban and Al-Qaeda become more dominant, civil society will shrink further. And civil society is not something, it's not a warrior kind of class which will fight. It will shrink. And that is what I think is happening. He referred to Salman Taseer's death. I think next time somebody dies, there will be even less response from civil society.
I'm afraid we have to end this session, but I have to thank very much Ahmed Rashid and Khalid Ahmed for being so very, very forthright. On my own part, I am amazed at how frank you have been about the state of Pakistan and about the state of writing here, and particularly Urdu. You want a greater voice for Urdu. I'd just like to add myself that coming from India, I have found that more than Indians writing in English, it is the local language, the Hindi and the Bengali. Those are the ones that get a greater readership. And, they get their voice heard through the medium of the local language. And the vernacular press really has a greater say in it. But we'll talk about it another time. I think we need 1 more hour or maybe 3 more hours to continue this discussion. But I'd like to urge all of you to go outside for the book signing. And if you have any more questions, and I know you have a lot of questions, please go ahead and ask them at that point. Thank you very much.
She's the most beautiful woman in Pakistan.
And you are right.